This is Jenna Burt, host of the Confessions of a Military Spouse podcast. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hello.
Hey, man, what's going on?
Hey, Jay, what's up, man?
You ready to talk movies?
I'm ready to talk movies. Let's do it.
Nice.
Hello and welcome back to Fear and There. We have a terrific episode in store for you today. I say that aspirationally. The episode, we're really just beginning it right now. These are the very beginning moments of it. But we are talking about the 2020 debut film, Relic, by the, I assume, Australian director Natalie Erica James. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is Zachary. I am calling in, not from Columbus, Ohio, if you can believe it. I genuinely hope that you were sitting down when you heard that. I have moved, ladies and gentlemen. I now live in Beacon, New York. So I'm calling in from Beacon, New York.
Ooh, Zach, that is big news. Big news that you just slid in there. Well, I'm Jay, and I am still calling in from New York, New York, specifically the Astoria neighborhood of Queens.
Big Apple.
Yeah, well, I'm part of like the, I'm more of like the stem or the leaf of the Big Apple.
You are. I think that's true. But if this news, if this cataclysm made you nervous, we're definitely still fear and there. There's still very much a fear and there element to this friendship. We're still friends at a distance. Instead of it being about a 10-hour drive from Columbus to Queens, I think it's now about an hour and maybe hour and a half tops, I would say. So it's not nothing. No, it's not nothing. It is something. It's not nothing. It's something.
Yeah. I mean, it is it is actual time that would elapse had I chosen to drive up there.
Right.
Yeah, I think I honestly, like, as we were talking about this before, if we ever got back to the point where we were like seeing movies again, first of all, as a society, but also but also as a duo here, like Fear in There was just it was a convenient pun for the situation. We started this podcast as a way to sort of replace the Freddy Krueger sized holes in our hearts when you moved away and we couldn't talk about horror movies at a gross midtown dive bar together anymore.
Oh, I do miss those dive bars though. Yeah. Any dive bar will do.
Yeah, remember the time we got free popcorn and we were pretty sure that the waitress was flirting with one of us, but it could have also just been the beer,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember memories of outside. I remember memories drinking in public places.
Yeah, you remember
just the idea of popcorn.
waitresses, like what?
Yeah, popcorn in like a big glass box that anyone could touch.
Yeah, popcorn didn't come out of the microwave. I think even if we are back to whatever that is, like Fear in There would still live on. I think we're having too much fun with this for it to not. Yeah. So,
Absolutely. And I think, like, just logistics-wise, if we were to ever go see a movie in theaters again together, we would still have to go home to our separate places and then do the recording. So it would continue to be Fear in There. Yeah,
for sure. Well, that was a lovely introduction. Not quite... big news with your location. It's only interesting to our three. I think we've now climbed to probably 3 regular listeners, so that's great. But yeah, I think it's exciting that you moved. I'm happy you're settled in. I hope that you and Mandy are doing well in your new spot.
Wow, thanks, Jay. That was really nice of you. Disingenuous, I think. I don't know. I don't.
Disingenuous. You just think I'm a jerk?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, naturally. Can you tell us a little bit about your space? Because I know in Columbus you had a basement, and that was a big thing. Do you guys have any creepy things in the new place?
Well, yeah. I mean, so for one thing, I have never lived in, other than when I left home at the age of 18, I have not lived in a house. So it has been a long time since I lived in a house that was, quote unquote, my own. I mean, Mandy and I are renting, but we are renting a detached house that does not have an immediate, attached neighbor. So
oh damn,
that's actually spooky. I mean, as somebody who spent I spent a year in Columbus and we were in an attached townhouse, and then this 6 preceding years that I was in New York. Are you kidding? You can't. You're living wherever it is you're living in New York. There are 8 people literally in your atomic space at that exact moment. So you can't.
Yeah.
So this is the first time that I've lived in a house that is ours, and so that is spooky in and of itself. But to make it very spooky, we're renting, and the owner of the house there's a basement and a garage that is beneath us that we do not have access to. And I mean, we could have it if we wanted, if we asked the landlord, but we don't need it, and that scares me. Like there could be people living below me, and I would have no idea. It's freaky. Even the landlord said it in like this, old timey kind of like, he's the gas station attendant in the middle of nowhere, like cabin in the woods. He's like, you don't ever need to go into the basement, that sort of thing. So
yeah, you don't worry about that. That door stays locked.
That door is locked.
Yeah. Julie shared one of her biggest fears with me the other day. And it was this story she had read years ago about this family that had heard some noises in their walls, and they had actually broken down the walls and found all these crawl spaces where homeless people were just living in their house.
What?
And now she's afraid that that is going to be the case in her future home. I'm like, oh yeah, that one incident that happened in the entire history of mankind, it'll happen again to you.
Well, I think it's kind of funny too, because that's almost certainly the truth. Like I've been to your apartment building. There are definitely places in your apartment building where people will be sleeping without your knowledge.
Oh,
it's I mean, when we lived in Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, there was a dude who slept in our stairwell a few nights before somebody noticed him upstairs from us. You just kind of accept that. That's okay.
Right. Yeah, you're kind of just like, well, that thump was a neighbor, but you would never know if it was a menacing thump because there are so many other thumps going on.
There are so many
building,
thumps.
It's
hard to identify thumps by thump alone. You need context.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Well, okay. Why don't we talk about movies? You want to talk about movies?
Yeah, I think that sounds good. I think we've dispensed with the pleasantries, and here we are to talk about Relic.
About the movie called Relic.
Yeah, I wanted to share, you brought this up, and I had to look at it. This woman has done nothing else. The one thing that I found interesting about her was she is credited anonymously or something on the movie, on the movie, what's that one where the guy Upgraded? It's called Upgraded.
I saw that movie.
Yeah, and which I mean is supposed to be actually pretty good. But Natalie Erica James, if you look at her known for stuff, she has directed a couple of shorts, I think.
Right. Right. Yeah, she has a few shorts. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is her first feature length. For her first feature-length film. And she was, not anonymous. She was on miscellaneous crew on the film Upgrade. So, and this movie has some weird producer connections that I did want to talk about later. The IMDb is like a little bit of a, I don't know, it's kind of, not dissimilar from the Impossible Maze of this house. It's just a rabbit hole that I went down after I watched the movie, and I was looking up for some articles and trying to sort of make sense of it, and I ended up looking at who produced the movie, and I was like, how the hell did this happen? So
I assume you're talking about the Russo brothers
and Jake Gyllenhaal.
Right? That's right. Oh my god, I forgot about that. That's right.
Just like, what the hell are we doing here? So. Yeah, so that's obviously we're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Right.
But
it's interesting. Yeah. It's very interesting to think about. I mean, certainly the Russo brothers, who are, I mean, purveyors of the biggest, most spectacle-laden kind of corporate filmmaking that there is, throwing their producing weight, which I'm sure is pretty hefty, behind a very moody, artsy, slow, dark, intimate, Australian horror movie.
Well, what is so interesting about it is it's not just the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which obviously, like, Joe and Anthony Russo created the biggest film of all time. Now, they cheated a little, adjusted for inflation, blah, 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 whatever. But didn't they also do Arrested Development or something, or Community, or they did like, they did Community. Executive producers of the show Community, which is like also kind of, they also did Happy Endings, which I never saw that one. But yeah, it's just, they have a fascinating IMDb themselves. So yeah, they directed some Arrested Development. I don't know if they were showrunners or not.
Oh, funny.
But, yeah, so they have this sort of sensibility, which, I mean, we talk about it all the time. Being a comedic actor is often discussed as being harder than being a dramatic actor, right? Because there's timing involved. There's, in addition to your performance, that doesn't exist in the same way in a drama. And so it's really interesting because, like, I have a lot of respect for these guys. You know, I got sucked into the MCU real hard, despite the fact that I like cinema, and so there's a concept of the MCU being like a moment in cinema that we need to acknowledge. But it's also, those movies are junk food. You know, it's like watching one of those movies is like eating a whole bag of Lay's potato chips. You know, it's like so good, you're enjoying every single moment of it, but at the end you just sort of kind of feel cheapened a little because it just sort of like hit all of the notes that you wanted, and it didn't leave anything wanting, which isn't necessarily what a movie should do, you know? And I actually think that that's pretty poignant about this film, and we can talk a little bit about in the discussion session, because this film is, it kind of, as I thought about it more, it kind of shook me more than I thought it would.
Okay, good.
In intellectual ways. So I'm excited to talk more about it. But
good.
Yeah.
Well, all right, excellent. So then good. So I think that I would love to hear a bit, I guess, about. Yeah, I mean, let's sort of breeze through this section, but give me a little bit about your context for how you watched the film, how you watched it physically, and also if you knew anything about it going into the film.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I knew, I kind of had retrospective context in the Russo brothers and Jake Gyllenhaal, which was something I'm kind of glad I didn't know ahead of it, because that carried a lot of weight. But I didn't know much other than that this was like kind of the latest indie darling of the horror community. I think this movie gets talked about a lot alongside that movie that Dave Franco did with his wife Alison Brie.
Yes.
The Rental.
I don't remember what it's called. But
yeah, those are the two. We're kind of in a really interesting time for indie horror because horror movies are so easy to make and so cheap to make. That I think we're seeing more small indie productions than we might have seen otherwise. Now, obviously, we had the remake of Candyman that got delayed, which is a shame. But I'm excited for that. Yeah, it's gonna be great. But in its place, I think we're getting some interesting indie films, and we got one with The Lodge, which wasn't really a COVID production per se, and you and I didn't like that movie. You know, you and I thought that movie was very well crafted and very, very nicely done, but it just was not a good movie. So I that was the context going into this. I was like, are we going to have another Lodge, or is this going to be something more like, I don't know, The Invitation on Netflix, if you remember that film. It's a decent film, yeah. Yeah, so I kind of was like, am I going to like this? Am I going to hate it? Like what? And so I kind of went in hoping for the best. You know, I really wanted a movie to win me. And so that's how I came into it. And this particular one I watched in bed because, you know, we don't have AC in every room here, and that's one of the AC rooms. Right. And Julie was working in the office, so I had to watch it in bed, which was, that's something I haven't done in years. Watched a horror movie in the dark in bed. You know, I've got my dog now, so that was nice. She was snoring happily. A comfort. Next to me, yes. But yeah, so that's my context, man.
Nice, excellent. You? Yeah. Well, it's really funny that you said that about watching it in bed and not having done that in years, because that's exactly my context too. I also watched it in bed, and I watched it. Mandy was right next to me. We'd gotten home kind of late and I just couldn't be bothered with being on the couch. I wanted to get out. I saw that it was an 89-minute film, and I was like, oh, this is like an episode and a half of prestige television, so it's really not that big of a deal. So I watched it in bed, and I we'll talk at the end about spookiness, but I'm kind of glad that I watched it in bed. It worked for the kind of film it was. I'll say more about that later. But no, I didn't know anything about this film at all. I know that I put it on our list to watch because I like Emily Mortimer, and I was excited by the idea of Australian horror. Because I do like Jennifer Kent very much.
We need to see Lake Mungo, I think.
Okay.
Is the name of it. I think it's an Australian horror film that people really like. I think I'm putting it out there to sort of like plant this seed.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that's an Australian or New Zealand or yeah, it's Australian.
No, it is. Yeah, I'm seeing it now. All right, cool.
Yeah, people like that film. And I think if we're going to sort of build our repertoire of Australian horror filmography, I think that definitely needs to be part of it.
All right, good. Let's throw it on the list then. Excellent. I knew, Emily Mortimer, a big fan. I saw a trailer. I was intrigued by it. I watched, as I usually do with trailers these days, especially for horror films, I watch about the first 10 seconds and then I cut them off because they without fail give important parts of the plot away. I think I saw one early review that was very positive, so that was good enough for me. I also figured, it was on Netflix. It was on Netflix, right? That's how we watched it? Netflix? No, we bought it. No, that's right. We had to rent it.
Yeah, we had to rent this one. Yeah, it's not out there. It's new enough. It's new enough.
It's new enough. It was it's a whopping $7, I think. That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, I mean that was my context for it, and I will say, and I'll use this moment to segue into our recommendation section, that I'm very glad that we put this movie on the list. I would probably recommend it. I think that I want to come down on the side of yes, I would recommend this film. I think that, well, not I think I shouldn't waffle about it. I was incredibly entertained for 89 minutes. 89 minutes is such a short amount of time to give over to any kind of piece of art, and for the horror genre, there's very little fat, very little that you would want to trim, and maybe you might disagree with that. I was entertained. It's certainly not a perfect film, and I'm excited to get into the meat and potatoes of that, but I would recommend it. What about you, Jay?
Yeah. I mean, I would absolutely recommend this movie. I think this movie kind of grew with my, the more I thought about it, and the more I sort of considered what was happening in the film and what I mean. Again, like I feel like we always talk about this, and we're always talking about what is this film trying to say to me, and you can't really do that with something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, except for don't wear cut off jeans in Texas. I don't know. But a movie like this is it's very clear what it's trying to say. It's not as aggressively like clean as something like Mother, how Mother was an allegory for both creation, but also artistic vision and artistic obsession. That film was very clear about what it wanted. This one wasn't quite there, but it did have undertones of like the entire time they were driving at something. And the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. My enjoyment of the film increased the more I thought about it, which is usually to me the sign of a decent movie. Because like I said, it's not that bag of Lay's potato chips with, it's something that you kind of have to work for a little bit, which if it's successful and it wins me over by me thinking about it more, then it's definitely something that I feel I get similar vision or similar feelings after I read a good book, and I think, that's why I would recommend it. I think it had some problems and some pacing issues, and I think some of the effects and some of the moments weren't as strong as they could have been. But I think my criticism are far outweighed by how much I enjoyed this film. So yes, 100% recommend.
Amazing. All right, perfect. Well, with that said, I think we should put up our spoiler wall, and we can get into it. What do you say?
I think that sounds good. The spoiler wall will go down now.
All right, here we are. Wonderful. So I want to begin our discussion of this film with sort of a meta question, kind of about horror film in general, horror films in general, the horror genre, I should say. So this film, we talked a little bit about the producers behind it. There were 1,000 distributors for this film, like what often happens when there's kind of a hot indie film on the market.
Especially during COVID, when there are no festivals, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. So after watching this movie, thinking back about who the distributors were, it was telling to me. It made me think about something in particular, that A24 was not a distributor on this film, or that it was not an A24 film. And I was thinking more about, we talk in this podcast naturally. It's inevitable that you do if you talk about horror movies. Even superficially, you stumble across the notion of the A24 style, which is like, this is a kind of reductive way to describe it in a quick way, but like A24 horror tends to be artsy, which is kind of a shitty word, but it tends to be artsy, tends to be dark, it tends to be
cerebral.
It's highbrow, it's elevated, it's highfalutin in a way, which, the other side of that coin is some people might find it pretentious, and certainly some A24 films teeter dangerously towards pretension rather than authenticity or sincerity. And I mean, and those are of course some of the, like, I don't know, like those are more of the content or the quality virtues. Whereas like there's also an aesthetic, there's tends to be a lot of darkness, low light. There tends to be maybe sometimes shooting on film, but mostly digital, I think. There's a real style. There's a sort of a palpable style.
You mean specifically visually?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In addition to narrative stuff too. I mean, A24 is a lot of slow burn films, that sort of thing. The Witch, Black Coat's Daughter.
Yeah, I mean, A24. It's not just horror, right? Like it's
no, of course not. Right,
everything. Didn't they do Waves? Did they do Waves?
Yeah. I mean, Moonlight, everything. It's a enormously successful studio, but a Ghost Story. What else? Ex
but
Machina.
also Uncut Gems.
Under the Skin. The Florida Project. Yeah, but I don't really mean, I'm not talking about the quote unquote secular films. I just mean they're horror movies. And so anyway,
secular being like non-horror,
right?
Not part of the cult of spooky.
Exactly,
yeah,
right. Not part of the religion. Yeah. Not observant of the one true way, which is, of course, horror, as we would establish. So to me, I'm watching this movie, and I am thinking that it hits every single A24 signpost. And I don't like that. And I'm thinking more about that and the impact of A24 on the horror genre and how we have been experiencing, or we experienced, and I think it's the discrete transition in movie history. Sometime in the last 10 years, we entered a new horror movie golden age, or a horror movie renaissance, which Jay, we've talked about this a lot of times. I'm going to say something which I would love for you to respond to or argue with or accept just without comment and move on, which is that we're done with that phase. We're not.
Oh, interesting.
To me, a movie like Relic.
What kind of fucking bomb were you going to drop here?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that the golden age of horror, the most recent one, is over. I think that A24 killed it. I think that most horror movies coming out these days, most ones that are making a splash, I shouldn't say most, but many of them, significant percentages of them, especially many horror film debuts, are mimicking a style that is now officially cliche. That is
okay.
gone.
So
It's done.
that I will discuss that versus we're out of the Renaissance. Saying a renaissance of horror in and of itself, we've talked about it, is pretentious. Mm-hmm. So we've both been guilty of being pretentious, like pretending we're film critics, looking back fondly at the good age.
No, I resent that. We are film critics. Why not?
Well,
you don't need a degree.
Everyone's a fucking film critic. Yeah, I guess, whatever. But we our audience isn't. We're not Roger Ebert here. But not that he's the end all be all.
Maybe the two of us combined are. No, I'm joking.
No, you're not. It's interesting because horror is such a thing that is you like what you like and you'll kind of live or die by that, right? I constantly get frustrated with people who look back on 70s horror with rose-colored glasses. People who talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween and The Exorcist as these things to live up to. When you look at these films, and so many films have done what they've done recently. No, I don't mean just mimicking them, but so many films can offer the same kind of modern version of that scare. And I'm not to take anything away from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think you and I both really enjoyed that film. It was our very first episode. So if you haven't listened, go back and listen. But it doesn't mean that anything that wasn't made in the 70s that has an ounce of CGI or an ounce of glossy production isn't good, And so I've been frustrated with that in the past. So when you say so what I'm kind of reading what we've said and what you just said, I'm reading it kind of like the 2010, let's call it like 2007 until now, right? Like the late aughts until now has been another version of what people comment on as the 70s and early 80s. These films that have such a place in horror film history, I think you're going to look back at films like Hereditary and like Midsommar, Ari Aster, sure. Shout out. But you're also going to look at films like Insidious and The Conjuring as these moments, and those are big studio productions, and they're fantastic films. And the reason I comment on them is it was sort of this return of supernatural horror in a way that was truly effective. And I think that's kind of when people talk about the Renaissance, that's when you started to see a lot of indie movies start to pop up around that era. I remember when you and I were first watching films together, we watched that Ty West film House of the Devil, which I love. It's incredible, and that's one of the earliest examples, I think, of like, oh shit, this is an indie movie that has a clear vision, has set up artistic rules for itself and abided by them, and made an incredible film. I think we're going to look back on these sort of movies, the It Follows era, all of these big splashy movies that everybody talks about, as another version of what happened in the 70s, for example. And sure, that's kind of what I mean when I say the Renaissance. And what you're saying is a lot of these studios, and I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with you, but a lot of these studios are like, oh shit, like these little tiny indie movies are not little tiny anymore. Horror is such a niche genre that people will follow Ari Aster like right off the edge of a Midsommar cliff and then get their head beat in with a hammer, like because they love Ari Aster films. And so if you mimic that aesthetic, which is I think kind of what you're saying, I'm using him as like an example. If you mimic that aesthetic, you'll have another indie darling movie that is successful, that makes your studio money, and gets a bunch of people with their pitchforks to follow along. So yeah, I don't know. I didn't read it as a problem, but yeah, that's my thought on what you said.
But that's sort of the point that I'm trying to make, is that we have now arrived at the end, in my opinion, of a discrete period of very good, consistent horror filmmaking. And the demarcation, the end of this period, is exactly the process that you are just talking about. It's the corporatization and commodification of a horror movie aesthetic, of an indie horror movie aesthetic. So studios started to pay attention to indie filmmakers who have vision for a horror film, and they put money behind them, and these filmmakers, I don't know, I mean, it's really, really, really good talent is once in a lifetime type stuff. So it's not like everybody can be, I don't know, the next auteur, like horror auteur, but like, what the process that you're describing of the like, okay, so studios are now realizing that these tiny little indie darling films actually have the potential to make a lot of money is the death of this period to me. It's exactly when it's when the genre begins to eat itself again. It starts to pilfer what made it so cool in the first place. In the films that you just
do you think so? What do you want to see instead? Like, do you want to see something that feels new and different?
Yeah, of course I do. Doesn't everybody? I mean, well, I know. I guess not everybody. That's the point, I suppose. But yeah, of course I do. I'm not. I don't want to watch another movie like The Lodge, which is just a I don't know. It's like a vaguely artistic product. I don't. And Relic. I mean, I thought there was a lot in this movie that I really liked. I mean, listen, we started this conversation off by both of us essentially without reservation, or maybe with a little reservation. We both recommended it, so I liked this movie. But, like, Mandy and I were having a conversation recently where I was sort of saying, like, I made the argument that I could really like a piece of art but think that it's bad.
That is something that has plagued you.
Well, like, we were listening to the radio and a song came on that sounded a lot like The Cure. I won't name the name of the band. I don't need to talk shit about some random band on our podcast, but and it sounded so much like The Cure that I was like almost convinced that it was The Cure. And when I found out it wasn't, and it was a band that, you know, that this song had come out in the last like 3 years, I was like, because I really liked the song. I thought it was great. I thought it was entirely derivative of another band, so much so that I thought it was that other band. So this band, the one that came on the radio, sounded completely unoriginal, and yet I really dug the song. You know what I mean? So there's still a pleasure to be had with a piece of art, even if it's entirely derivative. And to me, that's kind of what we have with the Relic.
Yeah, I think. Well, so calling it entirely derivative, I think, is extreme. You're painting with a very broad brush.
I admit to that. Yeah, I'll take it back.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and at the expense of going too far down this rabbit hole. I don't disagree. It's kind of like when you're talking about if you really love a band and then, you know, this is true especially in like the underground punk rock scene. If you really like a band and then they get successful and change their sound or evolve or experiment and they don't do it anymore, you're like, oh, you're a sellout. What the fuck happened? So you kind of look for other bands that do what the band that you liked used to do. And so that's when you start to get things like, I really want another House of the Devil, or I really want another Hereditary. You know, what I really respect about Ari Aster as a filmmaker and Eggers as a filmmaker is they've done wildly different things. Like Midsommar is very different from Hereditary, and the Lighthouse couldn't be more different from The Witch than anything else. You know, so I don't know. It's interesting. When you talk about a studio, A24 is the best example of it. But as soon as you try to like put, I don't know, Neon as a distributor, for example, against them, it kind of falls apart because Neon is not A24, but a lot of Neon's films could be the same. You know, they could be A24 films. So where the cookie cutter commodification of aesthetic comes in, I don't know, and I think that's going to be really hard to tell. But I can't argue with you on your feeling. Like the feeling you had with this film was that it felt like it was trying to emulate something that was successful at A24, and I don't argue with that, and I think that that's a good point. I don't think it took away from the film, and I also think that's what you said. You know, I'm going to give you credit there for saying you were like, I still enjoyed the film. I still think it was an effective movie, and I still would recommend it wholeheartedly. So, it's interesting, but I don't know that marks the end of quote unquote the Renaissance. What it does is it challenges filmmakers to think about why their movies were effective, not just try to recreate the success.
Yes.
You know?
Nice. Yeah, I agree with that. And it's well said. Okay, so maybe we should talk about the fucking movie.
We're 36 minutes and 16 seconds in. And,
no.
Yeah,
so talk to me a little bit. I mean, I've got other questions, but I want to hear from you. I mean, tell me what you liked about this film. I know that's sort of a basic question. We tend to not give open-ended questions to each other, depending on who's hosting. But, talk to me.
Okay, so I think it has a lot more in common with The Babadook than almost any of the other movies we've talked about. Obviously, I haven't... there are three, there's like a cross-section of three things that I wanted to talk about with this movie. There's the concept of mental health. This movie very specifically tries to tackle dementia. Mm-hmm. But, you know, the larger category of mental health, which is that's where the Babadook thing comes in. You know, so many movies, it's very in vogue to talk about grief right now.
Yeah.
And this movie did not talk about grief. It talked about kind of something that is much messier than grief, which, you know, it's, even though it tried to do it in a lot of the same ways as the Babadook did, it tried to tackle something, frankly, a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult to portray. So I think that's a difficult thing. And so I guess like in the same way that a figure skater is awarded more points for doing a harder routine, like I award more points for the big swing, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. I think that's well said.
Yeah. So there's that. There's the concept of old people who are losing their minds or creepy, which this movie had a little bit of. You know, there were moments. I think the scariest moment for me was when she was walking down the hall, and then Emily Mortimer, is that her name?
Yes.
Emily, right? Yeah.
You mean cool. the middle child? The middle daughter.
Yeah. Yes. What I'm going to call the lead of the film.
Okay, yeah, I'm with you.
She's kind of the center of it. She's the fulcrum that all of this pivots on. But yes, the middle of the generation group. When the grandmother's walking on the first floor, and she's saying like, "Mom, what's going on? What are you doing?" And then you see kind of behind her a figure walking toward her. But then you go back to the grandma, and you thought her back was to you, but her face was to you, but her hair was covering it.
That was wonderful. Of course.
Yeah, I thought that was incredible. The timing, the
wonderful.
bait and switch, the who the fuck is this other character kind of totally threw you off. So, which they never really talked about who that character was, which we should talk about that. But that was a creepy moment. She was an old senile woman walking around, and that's creepy. I don't think it's nearly as creepy as the film we watched, The Visit.
That was also something I thought about a lot during this movie. Yeah.
So it's like it had those two things, right? It had the Babadook, like this is an allegory for mental health, right? And then it had, oh, is this The Visit where we're going to deal with a creepy grandma for 2 hours? Like those two things were at odds. And then there was a third thing which creeped up in the third act of the film. And there's a very clear, short, but very clear third act, which is a subgenre of horror that I didn't realize scared me as much as it did, which is this is an impossible house genre. Like it's not really a subgenre, but I don't know if you've ever read the book House of Leaves.
No, I know what you're talking about. That's very funny, right? Like false walls or
well, just things that don't make any fucking sense.
Willy Wonka is a factory, basically. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so, which is why Willy Wonka, that scene is so disorienting, right? Like that original film, that scene is actually kind of creepy, right? Because they're walking into a door that's, it's like this optical illusion. But this is also something that comes into play in The Shining. A lot of people will dissect the floor plan of The Shining, and say like, "Oh, he's riding around this corner, but there should be a window, but there's no window here. There can't be a window here." Yeah, so it's not even as subtle as that. Like in the third act of this film, when the daughter goes upstairs to check on that cupboard, that it's a kid who has like Down syndrome or something, right? The neighbor, yeah. So he had been playing hide and seek with the grandmother, and had gotten locked in this cupboard and not let out. And so the youngest daughter in this movie of our main three, she goes up to that cupboard to see, like, okay, let me see if there are scratch marks. Let me see what's going on. And she opens it, and it goes way further back than it should. And she's like, oh, what is that? And so she goes in and she walks in, and there's like this cluttered hallway. And you're like, okay, that's creepy. But clearly there was like not a secret, but like an old forgotten passageway that nobody talked about. And then she turns a corner, and there's another super long passageway. And you're like, okay. And your brain is kind of doing some math to try to figure out, like, well, where are they in the house and how did they get there? And then she takes a right, and there are 3 other hallways going out on opposite directions, and doors and creepy weird things. Right. And so you're like, okay, so this isn't real. It's real because this house has dementia, right? Like, or whatever it is.
I think that's great. Yeah.
And that whole scene, I was ready to be scared of an old woman, and I was like claustrophobic in that last scene in a way that I am rarely claustrophobic during a film.
Sure.
Yeah, and so those are the only 3 takes. I mean, those are 3 big takes, but those are the 3 things that I've thought about since the movie ended. And that's and I think the way they kind of play that balancing act actually works really well in this film, all the way to the resolution for me. So,
no, I think everything you said is spot on. I mean, this gets a little bit ahead of the agenda, but I thought one of the reasons why I recommend this film is because I actually found it scary. And to be frank, we have not done a movie on this podcast that I have found scary in a long time. I think part of that is that I now, as a matter of course, watch a lot of fucking horror movies. And so, of course, I've become desensitized. But, I mean, I'm looking back at what we've done. You know, Creep, Candyman, Dr. Sleep, The Lodge, The Others, Midsommar, Hereditary. I mean, I've seen a lot of those. You know, so many of those were rewatches, and so that, which of course just wouldn't be as scary. But I mean, gosh, this was for sure one of the most effectively scary films that I have seen in a long time, and for that, I was just really grateful. Honestly, I had a lot of fun with it, and so a lot of my fear watching this film came in that final third that you described was when the house opened up and revealed itself. I think you just said it so well. You just said it was like the house was losing its memory. I think you said something like that, and I think that's terrific. So I really liked those scenes. I mean, I've always been really attracted to that like, you know, the closing in walls and the you know, a maze, a labyrinth. You know, it reminds me so much of Borges's fiction or whatever it is.
I mean, I've also rarely seen it so effectively done in a film. I think it's something that's much easier to do in fiction because, you know, you can just say she turns a corner and there's a spiral staircase. She goes down the spiral staircase and suddenly she's back where she started.
Right, exactly.
Like saying that is easy. Right. Because you're relying on the person's brain to fill in the gaps, but on film you have to, like, continuity is it's a language in film, and that scene and that act are the very definition of not continuity. Right. Because you don't know where she was when she started, when the hallway when the ceiling was getting lower and lower, and then she turned sideways and punched through the wall, and then she was back standing upright again, and you're like, wait, how the fuck did that just happen? And I thought it was incredible. I thought it was very disorienting, and it made me really, really, really want her to get out. Right. But also it made me really want to know, like, how does the grandmother fit into this? Like, what is she doing? Right. So I think it was very, very good.
Good. Yeah. So I'm glad you just said that about how the grandmother fits into it. And you've already touched on a lot of this stuff, you know, about what this movie is about, so to speak. You know, this and the Babadook is a really, really obvious analog to this film, least of all because it's also an Australian horror movie. But this film and The Babadook, in a way that The Visit, frankly, does not, and it's one of the things I like about The Visit is that it doesn't do what I'm about to say. which is that these are two films that perform symbolism to me. I mean, this is obviously my opinion, but The Babadook and more so Relic are films that perform symbolism. They perform allegory to the extent that the writer and filmmaker James, is that her last name? James?
Yeah. Yep. Natalie Erica James.
James, right. Like that she to me, this is a film that began with a little seed that maybe was like, I want to make a film about dementia, about Alzheimer's, about watching parents grow older, about having to bury your parents, which is obviously traumatizing, devastating, unspeakably terrible. And so you start with an idea like that, and then you write the plot to conform to that idea, that theme. And to me, what you wind up with is a movie that is constantly performing its meaning. And so instead of having like a sincere kind of organic film that can just be a story, instead you have a film that is trying really hard to always be about something. And to me, that's an automatic ceiling of quality. Like, I really like this movie, but it was very much stuck in the prison of trying to be about these big capitalized themes, like I said, Alzheimer's, dementia, and having to watch your parents get older, you know? Elder care versus elder scare. I don't know. I wrote that down in my notes.
Well, like, I texted you right after this film was over.
Yes,
and I was like, this film is trying very hard to tell me one specific thing, and I haven't wrapped my head around what that is. Like, because it's not just Alzheimer's.
Sure.
You know, that's not what it's trying to tell me. I didn't really know, and I don't know that I fully know what they want us to say at the end. I have some thoughts, and we can get into like solving this movie's riddle. But you're right; it was singularly focused, which limits it for sure.
Right,
Especially it limits what it can do plot wise. It limits what it can do scare wise. You know.
But to me, the problem with a film that is constructed entirely around a theme or an idea is that it tells you how to read it itself, which I just don't like. I never like that. I don't like a what the heck? Nope, that's not the word.
Perspective?
Nope. Prescriptive. There it is. I don't like that's so funny. I don't like a prescriptive film. I don't want a film to tell me how to watch it. I want to do it myself. God damn it. You know, I want my films to be DIY in that sense. So to me, I'm like it's funny when you texted that to me. I thought to myself, well, gosh, I wonder if we watched the same movie, because I felt like I was being told what it wanted me to think every scene. Like and again, like this is I could be totally off base, but like it's like we have a transgenerational trio, a mother, a daughter, and a granddaughter are all convening. The mother has Alzheimer's, and it is painfully difficult to watch the matriarch of the family suffer from losing memory. And to me, everything else just kind of falls under that lens of like, okay, so this is the events of this film they're all these individual metaphors for what it is like when you are dealing with a parent who is losing, or a grandparent who is losing their memory. So you have, Sammy gets trapped in this house and she can't find a way out. Well, that's just a lot like what it's like to experience the emotional toll of watching someone that you love lose their mind. It's you're lost, you're frightened, you can't get out, and then at the end, in the last scene of the film, to me, it almost ruined it. It's like I knew it was coming a mile away. I didn't want it to happen, but lo and behold, we have these three women who are all sort of really and it's a beautiful, loving image with a makeup job situation that I thought was awesome. That I thought the film deserves huge points for going there with really kind of seeing this metaphor through to the end. That this woman is completely stripped of her memories and is now just this organism, this entity. And the mother, Emily Mortimer, the middle woman, still has all of this empathy for this woman who used to be her mother, but who really isn't. And I thought that was so beautiful. And I thought the makeup they did on the older woman was so weird that she looked like E.T., but I was into it. And I thought leaving it there would have been phenomenal, but no, of course, Sammy, the daughter, has to see that the black smudgy mold is now on her mother. So it's like, oh my gosh! So here comes Alzheimer's for her, because her Alzheimer's is hereditary. There's a genetic link there, and so it's, oh my god! So it's going to start all over again. It's the horror of dementia, the horror of losing your memories. And
I see what you're saying there, and that's the part that I was telling you. I didn't know, like, what are they? Because anytime a movie ends with "you're trapped" as the answer, like, is that a good message? Like, it's the same thing. It's like why make a whole fucking movie about that?
Right, exactly.
Everybody knows that Alzheimer's sucks. Like,
right.
And if your grandmother has Alzheimer's, you know that you're more likely than the average person to have Alzheimer's. So, like, they don't need to spend 89 minutes telling me that. So,
no, right, exactly.
And that's kind of what I was getting at with, I didn't know what the movie was trying to tell me, or rather, more specifically, I was surprised that the movie was trying to tell me that, because it seemed so obvious.
It seems so obvious. Exactly. I mean, that's right. That's how I feel. Right.
So, but really, there's this other part that, and you touched on it briefly. I don't think the movie is just talking about the genetics. Like, obviously it is, because it even literally talks about that in the plot. There was a moment, like, all this subplot about this other cabin that her great-grandfather lived in.
Sure.
Like, that stuff felt, I don't know how to feel about it. Like, some of those dream sequences were very scary and very well done, but they also just, like, seemed to be horror movie fodder. Like, it was almost like they were trying to start us down the hereditary path for no reason. Because, like, that's clearly what it was. It's like, this cabin was in our family, and Alzheimer's is represented by these windows.
Exactly.
Like,
Right.
Yeah. So I hear you there, and I think that's some of the reason that I felt negatively about this film. But there's this other message that they're trying to give, which is what you're talking about, of this empathy for her mother, regardless of everything that's going on. Right. And not even empathy, like unconditional love.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But really what it is to me is it was acceptance. So, and I think that's a powerful message, because that's the only power you have in a scenario where there's Alzheimer's. There's no cure. There's no going back.
That's right.
So, to me, the symbolism at the end, that sort of disgusting makeup job of peeling back the skin,
right.
All of that stuff, which was really hard to watch, really gross, but also kind of beautiful too. Like, her moment of taking the skin off sort of felt warm, and I don't know, like that was really well acted.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
What I thought about that scene kind of, and that's what I've been thinking about since, I kind of threw away the fact that you see the spot of mold on the middle woman's back at the end. Like, that's fine. That's kind of like, okay, obviously, got it, cool. But what the grandmother's skin is, like, the entire movie, people are telling her, oh, how did you get that big mark, that big bruise?
Right.
Or, like, grandma, stop doing that. Like, you're hurting yourself. All of this stuff is them fighting against what is an inevitably, like, unfightable disease, right?
Well, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
And the end is her saying, okay, I've spent this entire time trying to get you to fall in line with what I expected from you. And it was essentially making your life unlivable for yourself. Like, you were confused, you're scared, we're stopping you at every turn because, like, you're hurting yourself making candles, but, like, all these things, the only time that anyone stopped to look at the grandmother, realize the situation, and try to make her comfortable was at the end, when she peeled the construct of her skin off the body of this, like, black thing. And I think, like you mentioned this before, I think that's a very beautiful message, and I think whether the same thing is going to happen to Emily Mortimer or not is whatever. I choose to leave the movie living in this world of like, okay, family, be there for family, let her be her, don't let her die alone in a cabin because you don't understand her. Like this is a positive ending to this movie, and I thought that I was very powerful.
I agree. I do very much agree. And I would just add to your interpretation of the mark that I think that the film is also showing the grandmother hiding the bruise because she's aware, you know, on some level, she is aware that she is losing her memory and that she has Alzheimer's or something, you know, to that effect.
Totally.
And there's enormous amount of shame in that. I mean, I could imagine an enormous amount of shame in that. Embarrassment, sadness, you know, everything that would come with that. So
yeah, totally.
So no, I agree, and I'm super glad that we're ending our main conversation on this because I do completely agree with you that at the end of the day, at the end of the film, there's a serious amount of poignancy. Again, I thought the very last frame cheapens it a little bit, but there is an enormous amount of poignancy, and it may even teeter on the profound, which is saying something, at least from me. So
yeah.
Let's kick it over to our ratings. I think that I know. I think that I can predict your ratings for this section for both categories. But nevertheless, I want to hear from you. So why don't we start? Well, let's start. I mean, I think we always start with our scare, with our how scary this film was on a scale of 1 to 5 sheep. 5 sheep being the scariest, requiring a full 5 sheep of counting to fall asleep. And the inverse to be true. So
yeah, this movie is very scary, but in not like any other movie I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. I think there are some traditionally scary moments. I was very tired last night, so it's not going to be a good sheep counting scale, but I'm going to put it at about a 3. I think this movie clocks an easy 3. It's not for the faint of heart, especially if you have old people in your life, because old people are scary in general. But I mean, they're scary for dementia reasons and acting weird, but it's also, there's something inherently scary about watching someone you love die. And that's what this movie is about. Like, so this movie is very troubling and very upsetting for anyone in that situation. And so, yeah, for that, I'm going to give it 3.
Very good. I'm so surprised to hear myself even saying this. But I'm doing a 3.5. I watched, I mean, afterward, I could not tell you the last time that I even made a comment to Mandy. Like, I finished this movie and I wanted to go fill up my water glass and needed to use the bathroom. And I was like creeping out into the hallway and fumbling for all the lights. I was actually scared. I was actually scared. Like, the movie carried over into my real life, which doesn't happen very often. And it was fun. That was fun. So it gets a 3.5 from me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the scariest part wasn't even really realized. Like, was the figure walking around the house? Like, 'cause you kept seeing a figure off to the side or whatever. Right. Was that supposed to be the old dead uncle, or was that supposed to be like a manifestation of the black creature she became at the end? Like, I never got like an answer.
Beats me. I have no idea.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's metaphorical answers for that, but that was the scariest part to me. Like, who is this figure? Is this a demon?
Sure.
Is this going to be a demon movie? Like,
right. What the heck? Right.
And frankly, the movie starts with it. You remember, like, the first shot of the movie is her, like, sort of half naked standing in front of her Christmas tree. And then off to the side, you see just like an arm move or something.
That's right.
So, yeah, I think that's probably what's taking away most of the fear.
Right.
Because I was ready to be super scared of this movie, and I wasn't as scared, but I was scared in ways that I wasn't expecting. So that's my take on it for sure.
There you go. So, all right, well, keep talking. Tell me what you would give it 1 to 5 pentagrams as far as quality. What is your official rating of Relic?
I'm going to give this movie 3.5 weird spiky candles. I think this is a very effective movie. It's definitely earns its spot being better than 50%, you know?
Yeah.
I think it has problems in that it's just so much like somebody, like you said, like performing symbolism, performing meaning the entire time.
Sure.
But I do not wish to take that 89 minutes back in my life. I thought the final message was pretty a pretty good message. I thought it was beautiful, and I thought it was kind of the natural message. And yeah, I wasn't nearly as bothered by the lineage aspect of Alzheimer's as you were. So yeah, 3.5 for me.
Very good. Well, yeah, we completely agree. Actually, we completely agree. I gave it 3.5. When I first finished the film, I gave it a 3. I was upset at the last shot, but the more I thought about it, the more that I would continue to be a little spooked by it, and how I appreciate that, I bumped it 0.5 star. So I also finished with 3.5. I thought this was a fine film. I thought this was a very good debut. I think that like I don't know. I've taught a lot of fiction workshops in my life. I've taught a lot of, writing short story writing. And a lot of very early stories are very thematically explicit. They're like, I'm interested in writing about X thing that is personal to my life. And so I'm going to force a narrative to conform to that X thing. And I think that's okay. I think that's totally great. I mean, every artist needs to start somewhere. I think that this is a pretty good debut. It was really competent. I thought James had a great control over her actors. I thought it was shot nicely. I thought the production, the set design was good. My complaints are conceptual. They're not in execution. So yeah, I'm happy with a 3.5, and I'm very happy with this movie. I was glad to have spent $7 on it. It was worth it. For sure.
Yeah, I think we watched another movie recently that was a debut, and I think we should continue to underscore when your debut film is this competent.
Right.
You don't deserve any less than a 3. Right. It's just I don't want to handicap it too much, but I also wanted to very briefly ask you: does Natalie Erica James, is she very good friends with the Russo brothers? Is that what we're thinking here? How did this happen?
I have no
how
idea.
did they get wind of this?
I have no idea.
I want someone out there, the 3 people listening, or anyone listening in the future, 2 years from now when we get famous from this podcast, please email me and tell me what the connection is. There's got to be a 7 degrees of connection between the Russo brothers and this director or this or one of these producers. Jake Gyllenhaal had a hand. Maybe he's friends with our director Natalie here. Who knows? But that's the most fascinating part of this movie to me. I think it's a capable movie that's great.
Very interesting. Yep.
But that part vexes me more than the movie itself. So,
it's quite confusing. Confusing. All right, folks, that, I am afraid, wraps up yet another episode of Fear and There, your friendly neighborhood horror podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate it, and we will catch you next time. Jay, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Make sure to subscribe, listeners, and hit us up at Fear and There on Instagram and Facebook and Friendster or whatever you're on.
MySpace.
Yep. Zach, it was a pleasure as always. Thank you for hosting tonight.
As always, my friend, I will talk to you soon.
Yep. Later.